regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Commission. This evening, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and if we could have a roll call, please. Thank you.
Commissioner Allen?
Here.
Commissioner Yessie?
Here.
Commissioner Marin?
Here.
Commissioner Woodham?
Here.
Commissioner Shervin?
Here.
Chair Castle?
Here.
Thank you.
Would you please stand while we salute the flag? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, do I have a motion to approve the order of agenda for tonight?
So moved.
So moved in second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we have any blue folder items tonight?
There are no blue folders items tonight.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent calendar. We have the approval of the affidavit of the posting for the regular Budget and Finance Commission meeting of October 10th for tonight's meeting, and then also the approval and the minutes from the regular Budget and Finance Commission meetings of September 12th from last month. Do I have a motion to approve?
I've got a question on the minutes.
Yes.
There's a reference in the minutes on second paragraph of the discussion of the meeting, which says that the minutes show that the Budget and Finance Committee, this was talking about the compensation for the city attorney.
Yes.
And there's a comment there that says, we suggested an 8% increase and the city council approved 3%. As I remember, we didn't approve any increase.
Right, that is correct. We did not improve any increase, and we left the meeting, well, I guess that was a review of what happened at the city council meeting, but our previous meeting we left, the plan was for me to write a letter to the city council saying that we didn't have enough information to approve an increase or decrease or even leave it the same. We just didn't have enough information. And so the HR department then provided more information to the city council, and then they made their own decision. But we never made a recommendation to increase or decrease the.
Yeah, the minutes should show that we made no recommendation at all.
And there was a letter attached to our agenda for that meeting, the letter that I wrote stating that. So if she wants to look at that language.
I think the motion that we passed was no recommendation due to lack of information.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other changes?
If the commission would like, you can go ahead and make a motion recommending that the minutes be amended to reflect the changes that you just stated, which would include the motion being corrected to reflect something different, as well as the 2 statements regarding that the commission had not made any recommendations, and the section about the letter being written and what you stated earlier. So if you would like, we can approve them. You would be able to make a motion and approve the minutes as amended.
Okay.
And, you know, if that motion goes through, then they're amended. If not, the other option is that they get returned to the minute secretary and then presented at a future meeting with the same changes. So it's up to you.
Okay. Would you like to approve it with that?
Yeah, I'd be fine I move that we approve the minutes with the exception of that correction which you just mentioned.
As amended. Okay.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And do we need to do a roll call vote on the consent calendar?
Oh. They didn't need to make that.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Allen?
Aye.
Wait. I'm sorry, just as a point of order, we should, before that motion, the final motion goes through on the consent calendar, we should open that up for public discussion.
Yes. Are there any public comments, either email or through YouTube?
There are no public comments at this time.
Is there anyone on Zoom? No. No attendees?
And there's no one on Zoom to speak.
Okay, thank you. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Yes. Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Yessi,
Aye.
Commissioner Marin,
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham,
Aye.
Commissioner Sherman,
Aye.
Chair Castle.
Aye. Thank you.
Motion carries.
There are no excluded consent calendar items. Are there any public participation on non-agenda items?
There are not any.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, items from continued previous agendas, which there are none. And then that brings us to item J, items for discussion prior to action for tonight. Discussions and possible action regarding the input on recommended assignments of general fund balance for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Tonight we have our Finance Director, Stephanie Meyer, to discuss that for us. Stephanie?
All right, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. It's nice to be back here again. We are here to present our fiscal year 23-24 fiscal year-end report with our recommended carryover items for the next year. This is your second look at these numbers. If you remember, we took a very early look back in August. As we reported to you the last time, and I'm glad it turns out to be true, we have mostly good news to share with you about our year-end numbers. As in prior years, I'll just note that the focus both of this report and the majority of what you read is on the general fund. However, we also present carryover items, including encumbrances, capital, and grants for the rest of the city's funds as well.
There we go.
Okay, and just before we get into it, I have a couple pretty minor updates to the numbers I wanted to share with you. We appreciate the ability to share this with you before council. We are usually working up somewhat to the last minute to prepare this report, so there are a couple very minor revisions I just wanted to show you. The capital carryover number we've revised upward by about $12,000 from what you saw in your report. Encumbrance carryover we revised downwards by about $8,000. So if you look at the report that we'll publish tomorrow and that will include your input from tonight's meeting, there'll be some very slight differences. I also included these updates in the slides that you'll see tonight, just so you're seeing the final numbers. Just wanted to share that with you. So we'll start again with our general fund performance. Great place to start is looking at our revenues. As I mentioned, this ended up being a fairly good news year for us. So overall, for the general fund, we ended about $2 million above budget, or about 2%. And you can see, you know, the pluses and minuses. Down here, we don't need to go over every single one. As you can see, we're about $1 million over in taxes. If you'll recall, we made some adjustments to that at mid-year. We increased the budget for property taxes. We decreased it for sales tax. So we ended up being, you know, in line, but a little over, which is where we like to be. A little over $1 million over in our charges for services category, in our use of money and property category, which reflects our leases. The majority of it reflects our lease revenues. We have some kind of minor performance under budget in the remainder of the categories, but overall, this is a positive performance for us.
Stephanie, quick question on that chart.
Sure.
Are there any unusual increases here that would lead us to believe that for the budget for FY25, we wouldn't be higher than 112.9?
That's a good question. Are there any unusual? I wouldn't say so. And actually, I think the next slide kind of helps speak to that a little more, because we're showing kind of historical actuals for our, well, actually, no, I'll go back here. So I'll just say no. I don't think this tells us anything significant about fiscal year 24-25. Again, where we're going to spend most of our time looking is in our tax category. So that's our most important revenue. And so we'll go into that in a little more detail in the next slide. Charges for service, I think it's a positive sign for us that these seem to have come in strongly in 23-24. Council did approve some fee increases for our 24-25 budget. So, you know, if this trend continues, this again should be good for us in 24-25. Does that answer your question?
Did we get almost $1 billion in additional taxes? Is that because of better collection or any particular item that generated the revenues?
So that's for the most part, that's because of our property tax revenue receipts. There's nothing we do about that. We just watched our assessed value go up, as we're very fortunate to see it do. But again, in our next slide, we have a historical look at our taxes in more detail, so you can see a little bit better what contributed to that increase. So starting with our 23-24 actuals, you can see property tax came in close to 36 million. Again, that's over our projections and our largest increase. And you can see also, if you kind of look at the prior years, it's up about $1 million from 22-23, but you see the gap between 21-22 and 22-23. Some of those prior years is a little larger. So in our prior years, we did, I think, see some slightly larger gains year over year than we saw in 23-24. Again, for property tax, that could partially be because we did increase our budget at midyear. So we kind of corrected at midyear for that anticipated increase. Sales and use tax continues to be in a category that we're going to look at closely. We ended the year significantly below our prior year and kind of below our historical trends. Again, this is something I think we'd shared with the commission all throughout last fiscal year. Our consultants had projected this. We actually have a meeting with our consultants next week to look at 24-25 projections. From my memory, they expected it to be pretty flat, maybe, you know, slight 1% to 2% increase. So that's something we'll look at this year. Utility users tax actually came in pretty close to budget after trailing most of the year. It's down from 22-23, but that was a unusually high year, as you can see from this trend, just because of the very high energy prices in 22-23. We are actually meeting with a consultant on this revenue source as well. So I think we'll have some good information to inform our mid-year review. Transient occupancy tax, this came quite close to budget. It's a little over prior year. Nothing too remarkable here, except again, this is where we hope to see some additional revenue in 24-25 when our Marine Avenue hotels, we hope to start contributing to our TOT again. And then finally, our property tax in lieu of VLF. This kind of goes just in parallel with property tax. It's the same factors. So you notice kind of a slightly larger increase there. We didn't actually increase this line item at mid-year along with property tax. So we just got a little bump ahead of budget.
What is VLF? It's property tax in lieu of?
It's property tax in lieu of vehicle license fees. So this relates to a change, and I'm going to mess this up. It's a change to how the cities received vehicle license fees back in 2005. So the state was giving cities a share of the revenue that I believe cities had received prior to that. It was actually connected to the city's share of vehicle licenses up until, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think maybe 4 to 5 years ago. Since then, they've decoupled those two things, and it's just related to the city's property tax.
And I just have a question on the Marine
Sure.
Avenue
Yes.
taxes. So we're 1 quarter essentially into 24-25. When will we start receiving sort of the full run rate of tax, TOT tax from those hotels?
So our latest projections are probably into January of 2025.
Okay.
And again, this depends on them bringing in strong enough transient occupancy tax to get our reserve account up to $3 million.
Okay.
They had a pretty strong summer. They had a few months in the spring, which were not so great. So I think, you know, we watch this closely. I think we're still on track for January, which, you know, should get us close to this additional 1.5 million we're hoping to get 24-25. But we'll be able to update you on that at our, with our quarterly budget report as well. And we're watching it very closely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So then, just looking at the expenditure side, again, the revenue side came in about 2% above budget. Expenditure side, excluding encumbrances, we came in about 7% below budget. So taken together, those turn a pretty good result for the city. Couple things to highlight here. Personnel, we actually came in very close to budget. We're about 2% under. This is something we're going to watch closely moving forward with all the MOU increases. We think we captured those successfully in our 24-25 budget, but something we'll continue to follow. I'll just note too, so these large numbers that you'll see in contracts and services and capital outlay, a large portion of that would be encumbrances and in the case of capital carryover. So we will carry over a lot of those funds into 24-25. If you exclude encumbrances, we're still about 5% under budget for our spending. And then going back to our general fund constraints. So every year we like to show the council how we've gotten from our kind of overall fund balance to the amount that we're able to spend. I'll call this our general fund constraints. So we start at about 27.1 million. I'm sure you can tell this number is rounded. This is not final as we haven't completed our audit yet, so we give ourselves a little room. We then back out everything that's mandatory, so items that are restricted by external law or policy. So these includes notes and loans, and also the city's 8.33% contingency. We then have our assigned and committed items. This is a larger category. So in here we have things like our encumbrances, petty cash, compensated absences, and in this case are the assignments that we included in our 24-25 budget. These are items, they don't quite rise to the level of mandatory because council could ask us to unencumber funds, for example, or change our level of petty cash, or we could decide not to hold aside for compensated absences enough to fund all vacations if everyone took vacations at once. So we could decide not to do that. These are more discretionary. However, they are things that we've generally committed to. This bullet point for assignments in the 24-25 budget, we keep telling you is the last time you'll see this number. If you'll recall, these are funds that we had kind of set aside as part of the 24-25 budget. We were able to use these to plan to fund our UAL payment and to fund our workers' comp and a few other items. Because we haven't actually spent those funds yet, they're still showing up as held aside in this assignment. As we spend those, that will come out of our assignments and we'll not see it moving forward. And then finally, we have our carryover assignments. And this is where we recommend additional items for council. And I'll go through that in a little more detail on the following page. But this leads us to our ending fund balance of a little over $350,000. This is pretty similar to what we've seen in our carryover and our mid-year the last few years. We end up with a few $100,000. Generally, we then recommend not to spend it. We don't feel very confident spending down to the last dollar, but it's something that we put there for council consideration. So to go into a little more detail in this carryover assignments category, so the first item on there, we have some items including our MOU commitments. So for example, for our fire MOU that council approved in September of 24-25, these are things we kind of knew were coming, but we didn't have numbers for during the 24-25 budget. But since they're now real and we have some fund balance, we want to make sure we cover those. We are also looking to ensure we properly balance all of the city's other funds. So last year we had noted in our harbor tidelands and uplands funds, because of some kind of pent up capital spending, we were looking at deficits in both those funds. Both of those deficits at year end ended up being considerably smaller than we'd expected. There are two reasons for that. We looked and really trimmed back capital spending to the most essential items. And we also had pretty significant savings in personnel. However, we do want to make sure that we bring those funds into balance moving forward. And that's what the the approximately 1.5 million is there for. 700,000 is made up of department requests. So generally, if we have any available fund balance, we tell departments, we ask them, are there any items that are one-time, they're closely linked to council priorities that you just weren't able to get to and need to spend in the next fiscal year? So in total, this led to about $700,000. We also have about $3 million in capital projects. And again, these are for multi-year capital projects that weren't spent in 23-24. I will just note that we will also not see this capital projects number in the general fund following this year. Council approved that we move all of our capital spending to our capital projects fund, which is consistent with standard accounting best practice, and also just gives us kind of a clearer look at the general fund year over year when you don't see these kind of large distorting balances. And then we have finally our unspent donations that will carry over to the next fiscal year. So that adds about 6.3 million, leading to our available unassigned fund balance.
Then we have a little more detailed discussion on the capital projects, maybe in the next meeting.
Yes. Yep, and I'll also say as well, there are many attachments that came with the report, and there's a lot of detail in each one of these attachments about all of these items. So each capital project is listed in detail. Each department request is listed in detail. All of the encumbrances are listed in detail. So if you have a question about any specific item, those are all in the attachments, and we're happy to discuss those. I know it's a lot of information.
But we're on schedule with all of these items to actually spend them.
For the general fund capital projects, you know what? I would have to defer to Jesse on those, and we can look in the attachment to see the specific general fund projects.
Well, I'm thinking in addition to the capital projects, the other items on here, capital projects are about half of this.
Yeah, it's about half.
The rest of it, we're on schedule, or we're in process of spending that much money, right?
Yes, 100%. So yes, that's a great question. Apart from the capital, we would expect to spend the remainder of these items in fiscal year 24-25. So our recommendations, our recommendations are to take no action with the unallocated fund balance. And, in addition to kind of leaving a little bit of cushion, because it's a budget, you kind of never know what's going to happen. We are aware of some fiscal pressures we're going to experience. I think we have at least one other MOU to negotiate in this fiscal year. As this commission's very aware, we have our fiscal year 25-26 pension payment that's coming up. So while that's not urgent, it's something we want to continue thinking about. At this early point in the year, we'd prefer to kind of leave this alone. We'll have another check-in point at mid-year to see what we might have available. And just our next steps for this commission with our finances. The next report you'll be looking at is our ACFR. We hope to get that in front of you in December. And again, as usual, this commission will review before the city council does. And then we are expecting to get our mid-year budget to you in February of 2025. So when you look at the mid-year, you're going to see this same general fund constraints report, except we're going to have all our actual numbers from our audited document. I don't expect they'll be very different. We'll again have our same evaluation of revenue, expenditure, and fund balance. And at that point, we'll look at any further adjustments. So with that, as usual, we ask for this commission to do tonight is to discuss, provide your thoughts, your input, your recommendations for council. And we will include that in our report. So we're going to finalize it. We'll probably post it tomorrow. So we can include it before we post it. We can also, include your feedback as a blue folder item if you'd like a few more days. So with that, I'll open it for your discussion. Any further questions?
A couple of things I've asked for in the past and I've not seen anything yet is what is some sort of a presentation by someone from IT about cybersecurity.
Okay.
And that could be a major threat, as a lot of utilities and cities have experienced. And then many of them are caught by surprise, and that costs a lot of money to restore.
So I can't truly speak for our IT director, but I think he is 100% of a similar mindset. I think he thinks about IT security threats a lot. So yes, this is something I'm happy to kind of discuss with the city manager, see how he thinks is the best way to kind of present that idea with this commission.
And the other thing is, what reserves do we have for any natural calamity, such as earthquake? And we see a lot of things happening in other parts of the country. Luckily, we're not subject to that yet, but some unplanned emergencies like the earthquake, for instance, it's always going to be sword hanging around our head. So we need to have reserves and maybe a little more than we ever had before. So at least some awareness and what kind of plans do we have from budget viewpoint?
I can just tell you, currently, at least for the general fund, our reserves are we do have just the 8.33% contingency reserve. So that is our only reserve that I know of for kind of economic contingencies. We also do have about $8 million in our PERS reserve. Obviously, that is set aside for PERS. However, it's not legally restricted in any way. So the city, would have access to that as well. But I don't know that council has had a discussion about reserve levels or increasing those, but that's what I know we have today.
You said 8.3%?
It's 8.33% of our operating budget, excluding transfers. And I think that's supposed to equate to approximately 1 month. And that's set by policy.
What would it take to increase it to, say, 10% or 12%?
So I believe it's set by policy. So I think that would be an item that council would bring forward and direct staff to consider, and we develop a proposal. And then I believe council would need to adopt this.
Yeah, that was such a good point you made. I believe GFOA, Government Finance Association, they recommend at least 15% or close to 20%. So the recommendation that we can give to our council is to increase our reserves at least to the recommended, by this government association, at least to those levels, which means it has to at least double. So that's that's a recommend. Yeah, we do need to increase our reserves. I agree with you.
Yeah, I would have opted for 15%, but if we had at 8.33%, the least we can do is to get it up to 10, if not 12.
Yes, because there is a guideline and we are not even meeting that guideline.
Just one comment. I think if you look at the revenue, you've got to come away with a pretty favorable view of the economy and of the city's chances of succeeding. Expenses are going to always grow to meet whatever revenue is, so we're going to spend whatever we bring in. But it's interesting, if you look at three figures, the original 2024 budget showed 104 million of revenue. The revised budget was up to 109, and the actual was 112, almost 113. So that reflects a good economy and good results for the city. So that's my only comment, is that we're in good shape compared to where we could have been, and looks like we've totally recovered, except for TOT. We've recovered almost every revenue category from pre-COVID. So I think we're in good shape.
Any other comments?
No.
Would the commission like to make a specific recommendation about the reserves, or I don't mean to direct you. I just want to make sure we're
We
not.
should do more research, like what other cities are doing. or-
So I just looked up and I was correct. It says no less, so the GFOA, which is the big Government Finance Officers Association, I think they're probably the most prominent one
Yeah,
for
them,
government
yeah.
finance. They're saying no less than 2 months of regular general fund operating revenue. And we have only one.
Right. So, I mean, right now, that number is, I think it was roughly 8.5, 8.6 million.
Yeah.
So, even if we were, let's just say if we were to double it to 2 months and make it 16.6, that we would probably have to do that over several years, just because that would mean, 8 million of a $112 million budget. So,
But we need to have a goal so we can one day, 10 years from now, reach that goal.
could you do some research and find out, sort of where other cities are and how they get from, if they, let's just say if they were at 1 month, the 8.3, to get to 2 months or 3 months or whatever the number is?
I know both Torrance and El Segundo, it's 20%.
They have 20% in cash? Okay.
Yeah. Camarillo has 30.
Wow.
30?
Wow.
But I'm sure there are other cities that I'm not aware that they're not as, some in Orange County probably.
Right.
But yeah, 20% is what everyone's shooting to get to.
Okay.
So
So-
of course, we can do it in a year or two.
Right.
But that's something, it should be one of our financial goals.
Right. So if you could do some research for us, and then, we could come up with, I guess, a plan, if we want to go to 10 and how we would get from 8.3 to 10. Because we have our UAL growing every year already and a couple of other things to balance with that. But yeah.
Yeah, so the recommendation, I guess, to council that I would have is for them to work, think about increasing our,
Well, I think from the finance department, if we could get sort of the steps and to come up with a plan to submit to council, I think that would probably be, and then we could, basically when we go to them, we could talk to them and say, we think we should increase it from 8.3 to 10, and this is how we're thinking of doing it before we get into the next budget cycle. Because if we could, if we budget and that we start taking, $1 million a year or $500,000 a year and increasing that 8.3 over 3 or 4 years, that would be a way to sort of ease it into the budget process. But I think before we even start the budget process, we could figure out where other cities are and how they do it. That would probably be.
It's a funny way to kind of propose a more definitive plan to the city council versus just saying review.
I'm sorry, can you speak directly into the mic?
If we just propose for them to review, it's a little vague. If we could give them a more definitive plan,
Right.
by doing the research and direction of what we would recommend. Is that something we want to add for discussion next meeting?
We could discuss that next meeting. Does that
Yep.
seem doable?
Yep.
Put that on the agenda for next time. Any other questions or comments?
I guess we need to make a motion to, I move that we approve the recommendation to leave the funds unspent to help mitigate future fiscal pressures.
So just before we do that, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments at this time.
All right, thank you. So do we have a second for the motion?
Second.
Okay, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Allen?
Aye.
Commissioner Jesse?
Aye.
Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham?
Aye.
Commissioner Sherbin?
Aye.
Chair Castle?
Aye,
Thank you.
thank you. 1 second. Okay, are there any member items or referrals to staff? I think the only referral to staff would be to check with the city manager about either having him come in to discuss cybersecurity or maybe at some point having the head of IT come in to discuss that. Is there anything else for staff?
Remind me, when do we have CalPERS coming in? Is that November?
December. So I have to say, I do not have the speaker confirmed. However, they are aware of our date and they've told me that someone will be here speaking virtually, so they'll be on Zoom. If there are specific items that you'd like to discuss, that's something I can share with them in advance. If you remember last time, we asked them to focus on the investment side, and the time prior to that, they had talked a little bit more about our actuarial report. So if there's a specific focus, you can let us know beforehand, and we'll make sure to prepare them so they have the right people at the meeting.
Okay, all right, thank you. If there are no other items, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.